So we want to do a contact us form. I'm going to go, we obviously need to create an HTML file first. I could call this index.html. I think I'm going to call it contact us .html, because oftentimes this may not be the first page that you see. Often this is another page in the website. So let's start filling that in. Okay, so we've got a basic placeholder there. Change the header to contact us. And then we want to start filling in the form. Okay, so what's the first tag that I need to start a form?
Form tag.
A form tag. Okay, so that's going to be on the outside. And again, we talked about what are the attributes that I need to have.
Method and action.
Okay, so the method, given that this is a contact us form, right? What would make more sense? Well, it's going to be for sure a post, right? Because I'm going to probably put my email address in here or things like that. So it might be things I want to keep private, as well as the message that I'm sending you. So there's a lot of things in here that I may have, privacy concerns on. So that should definitely be a post. What about the action? Well, let's set it to, we don't have a page here, so maybe I do need to have a placeholder though. Maybe I'll call it result or sent.html. Let's say it's going to go there when it's done. Okay. So common things I might see on a contact form would be things like, what's your name? What's your email address? Subject, and a message. So typically the way a contact form works, it ends up generating an email to the owner of the site. So you need enough data to be able to generate that email. Does that make sense? So this is the stuff that you usually need. You need what's the name of the person who's sending it, what's their email address, and what's their subject, what's the subject of the email and the message of the email. Now, I could, right, if I have a form like this, I could just post my email address on the website, right? Instead of creating a contact us form like that. Why might I want to create a contact us form instead of posting my email publicly?
Some people are more willing to fill in a contact us form than to actually have to type an email out.
Okay, so it might be easier for them.
Harassment.
Explain that.
Okay, so like people can, like, the internet is like free source, open source. Anybody can see your email.
Anybody can see your email.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like you might as well just gave away your password to hackers or something.
But it's public, yeah. So if you post your email address in like a mail to link or anything like that, it's going to be out there for anybody to see and for anybody that wants to exploit it. And that means you're going to get a lot of spam. If you post your email publicly in a mail to link, you are going to get a lot of spam just by doing that. So having a contact us form provides a way to kind of get around that. So you don't have to have it publicly, but it also makes it easier to potentially behind the scenes reroute those messages to whoever it's most relevant to. So sometimes they'll have a drop down on here that says, well, what's your problem? What kind of category does it fit into? And that may then route the email to different people, rather than routing them to one single email address. Okay. So those are all reasons I might want to have that. So let's say I want to build this form. So we know we have those 4 fields. What's the first tag that I need to add inside of the form? What's the first thing you put there? And you put a label. And what's the label for?
For the name field.
For the name field, all right? So I might want to put the name here as the text that's going to appear in the label. What's next?
Input field.
Input field. And so this one needs to have like ID is name, and name is name, and type, yep, is what?
Text.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else I need to add?
Not that I can think of.
Okay, so let's leave that like that. Do I need to do anything to link these two together?
You gotta put the the ID for name inside the for thing.
Okay.
The label.
So I need to say this is a label for the name field. Okay. So I can do a similar thing with the. I can do the same thing now with the email. So I'm going to say label, and we'd say like for. Well, maybe come back for.
By the way, Mr. Smith.
Yep.
I know that you are our guru, but when I just type the word label and then hit tab, it does all that for me.
Oh, it may.
Without the bracket.
Interesting.
So yeah, if I just type an L for label and hit tab, it works.
I'm definitely not the Mnet guru as far as that goes. So okay, that's cool. I didn't know it could do that. ID here is email. Name is email. What type should this be?
Email.
Mm-hmm. How is that different than a just a text input?
It has requirements, right?
True.
It has the requirements of having like the @ symbol and then.
Mm-hmm. 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 So that's true.
Would you add a placeholder to these two, or are those not needed at all?
Placeholder isn't required. We may come back and do that as a second pass on this form. Placeholder is never required, but it can be helpful. So let's come back to that in a minute. So what type should the subject field be?
Text.
Email.
Sounds good. You're saying type email?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the wrong one for subject.
Yeah.
Text would be okay.
And message should be a text input too, right?
Is there a text box input?
You could do like a text area.
Yeah, text area would be a better fit. Because reason being I want them to enter more than one line of text, right, as their message. Okay, so I've got a text area, so I need name, an ID, and a name. It's worth knowing you don't have a type attribute on text area because there's really only one type. There's no way to do validation easily on multi-line text. So we're going to say ID and name. We need those. We don't need a type because it's a text area. What do we want to specify, though? Pull this. How big it is, right? Okay. Because right now what we're seeing is here, it looks like it's kind of 2 lines long and it's a certain height, right? Sorry, two lines in height and whatever its width is. So what values can we use for its width and height? And how do we specify those? You said min and max?
Yeah. Or I don't.
So like min is something? Is that what you're thinking? Is that what I hear?
Don't you do like height and width?
Height and width?
Okay. Oh, sorry.
Remember, there's some special attributes for text areas to specify their dimensions. It's columns and rows. Okay, so how many rows of text do we want?
10 million.
10 million.
I got a pretty hefty message.
Okay, so 10 million. Let me just make sure. Okay, so here's her 10 million. Something's not right. It's rows, plural. Okay, so there's our 10 million. It's got quite a scroll bar. All right, let's pick a smaller number. Maybe 7. Maybe just limit them to 7 rows.
I don't know. I don't think I can release all my anger into 7 rows.
Well, you can make it bigger.
Now we're talking.
See how there's this dragging thing? Anytime you add a text area, unless you turn that off, which you can do with CSS, users can actually resize a text area any way they want. So let's maybe make this one 7 rows tall, 40 columns wide. Okay, so now I have a place for all the text inputs. Do I need anything else on this form?
Submit and reset.
Okay, so let's say we have a submit button. What tag should I use for that? Button. Okay, let's use button. All right. What type should this button be? Submit. What's the default for buttons tags? What's the default mode?
Submit? ?
So default for these, for inputs, is text. And yeah, it's submit. It's submit for buttons. So we've got that. We've got another button that's going to be our reset button. Okay, so we've got that. Do we have all the controls that we need? I think so. Now, the controls are all there, but they're still kind of ugly, right? So what can I do? What can I do to improve the look of this form?
Float everything.
I could float everything? Okay, let's see what happens if I float everything.
Do not float everything. It's a joke. Mrs. Smith, don't do it. Don't do it. Please don't do it.
Somebody give me a different option.
Just flexbox it.
Flexbox it. Yes, absolutely. So let's take the form and turn it into a Flexbox container. So form, we say display flex, flex direction is column. That's a good start. Or is it? Probably a good place to start.
I mean, it was a better start than what it was looking like.
Yeah. So at least it's all vertical. Okay. What can I do to make this more usable now? I've at least got everything vertical.
What do you need? Make it more usable.
We want to make it look pretty.
Margins.
Huh?
Comment everything out and you have a really nice blank white page.
It's true, but I still want it to be a contact us form.
You can.
Margins.
Margins. Okay, margins on what?
The body in HTML.
Body on HTML. So body. What do I want to set the margin to? Okay, so body margin 0. Let's try that.
Troy, were you thinking about the margins on something else, or were you actually thinking about that?
I was just gonna say margins between the tops and bottoms of the different labels and inputs.
Different labels and inputs, right? Okay. So maybe I want to separate my inputs out a little bit. Okay. So let's say I target the input tag, and let's give that a margin, maybe a margin bottom.
Yes.
Of 1 rem. Okay, so there's a little bit more space there.
Can we also make them smaller? I don't like how they stretch across the screen.
Yeah. Okay, so how? How,
I knew
Sheridan?
that question was coming, and now I have to
You're
figure
the
it out.
teacher, and you're the professional. Maybe you'll find a way.
So what do I want to make smaller? I could make the form smaller, or I could make the body smaller.
The form.
The form.
Okay.
Make the input smaller, like the width.
Well, I'm going to start with the form because it's going to make everything else inside of it smaller.
Is this where flex strength comes in?
So if I say like max width, the max width of this is maybe 600 pixels or 800 pixels. That will reduce the width of the form to being no wider than 600 pixels. So you can see how that brings everything in. The upside of using max is you can see if it gets smaller. I guess I need to go into the mobile version. If I'm looking at it in mobile, then it still allows it to get smaller without having a scroll bar. Okay, so I've reduced it down to it's only 600 pixels wide now, at most. Sheridan, anything else?
I mean, you can try and fix the buttons.
Okay, I could try to fix the buttons. What's wrong with them?
They're still wide.
They're still wide. Okay.
They don't look like buttons. That's what's wrong with them.
Yeah. So how could I make them less wide?
Changing the width.
Changing the width? Okay. So how would I do that in CSS?
I mean, I would personally, I would make like a button CSS and then change the width to a separate thing.
Okay.
And then I would put them next to each other.
Well, in this
Do
case,
buttons have to be fluid at all? Like, or can they be static where they stay, or fixed rather?
what do you mean? Static or fixed?
I mean, do the buttons have to be responsive?
I think that we can fit them in a way that will work on both mobile and desktop.
Okay, so yeah, we can just do like some pixels or something.
Okay.
Well, wouldn't you want to do like width like 30%, so it's only 30% of the form size?
Well, let's say, okay, so let's look at that real quick. Let's say I make these buttons 30%. Okay, so I've set them to 30%. As the form gets smaller, notice that the buttons get smaller. If you set them in terms of that.
But it still looks fluid on every device. Well, like, no device is that small.
See? Well, but let's say it's in Spanish, right? If you have to translate this to Spanish, this is going to happen. it's going to happen that you're going to have more text than can fit in the button. So I don't want to set it in terms of percentage because it's going to change. I really do not want that to change based on how wide the screen is. I'd much rather it to be one of two things. I'd rather have my buttons either be a fixed size, like you're suggesting with pixels, or I'd rather have them be just size to what the text is, right? Size to how big the text is that's actually in there. Okay, so 30% isn't a great thing in general for buttons or control or form inputs because you're always going to come into a place where you have some weird behavior like this. So if you are going to use a percentage, use 100% as the kind of the only viable one. So let's say we say in pixels, 100 pixels. Okay, so if I say 100 pixels, that way they stay the same size regardless of what the screen size is. Is that good enough?
With that, I mean, yeah, it's cool, but would that change along with how much text is inside the buttons?
It won't. You're right. You're right. It won't. So, and I can see that if I just pick a smaller number, see if there's too much text, it is going to fall out.
So would flex shrink work here?
No, flex shrink won't work here.
Can't you set a variable of the width of the button? I've seen this done before, where you set the variable of the width and
Okay.
you store the variable and then make a percentage of that button, the text.
I couldn't follow that. What do you mean?
So I've seen it before where they put a variable. You know how CSS can store variables?
Okay.
Where they put a variable of the button width, of how big the button is, and then they use that number and do a calculation, and they make it a percentage. They make the text a percentage of the button width.
Well, you still end up, if you effectively, you're still kind of setting a number to it.
It's like fluid to like, so it's like completely responsive to every form. Like I've been doing media queries all around, it like makes it responsive to like everything.
Well, yeah. So what I would say instead is actually a much simpler solution. I would just say, rather than saying it has to be 20 or 100 or whatever, say it has to be at least that wide. Does that make sense? Tell it instead that it has to be at least that wide. So that way, if it does become longer, then the text becomes wider. Okay. Now, you said something about flex shrink. Shrink won't work in this case because, first of all, the axis, right? This is the main axis right now. Main axis is vertical, right?
Correct.
And your shrink works when there's not enough space on the main axis. Well, that would shrink it vertically, right? You're talking about if we run out of space vertically. But I'm looking at the cross axis, which is sideways, right? Where cross axis is horizontal right now. So how do I affect that cross axis?
That would be align items.
Align items. Okay. So where do I need to set align items?
That would be in the form.
In the form. Okay. And what do I need to set it to?
We're trying to spread them out. Well, we could just try different things, but it certainly can't be like it is. It's got to space around. Let's try space around. Looks great.
Okay, you're missing something. Remember, align items is the horizontal, right? How many items are on each row here right now? One, right? So you're telling it space around that one item, and there's no leftover space. What's align items currently set to? Everybody remember what the default for align items is?
What are my options?
Okay.
Stretch, isn't it?
It's stretch, yeah. So your options are start, center, and stretch. But yes, it's by default it is stretch. So that's what we're seeing right now, is it's set to stretch. So if I don't want it to stretch, what could I pick instead? Start. Okay, so flex start. Ta-da! Right? So if I tell it not to stretch it, and that's the whole reason that they became so wide, is because they were being stretched by the flex box. Okay. So what if on mobile I do want my inputs to be that full width? What do I need to do to now go back to those and get those back to the full width? And there's two ways to do this.
Just flex stretch it again?
Okay. Well, let's say I go flex stretch. Okay. So
well,
there
you wouldn't even have to have an align items since the basis is already stretched, right?
Okay. So that fixes the fields, but it doesn't fix the buttons.
Oh yeah, true.
Right? We fixed
could you just put a div around the buttons?
I could put a div around the buttons. Yep, and that will probably be what I want to do anyway. But remember that align items, there's a corollary. This sets everything in the container. Do you remember that there's one that you can use to set just a single item?
Self-align? Or
align self, right? So rather than changing the alignment for everything, I might say let's just align self and just align these to the start. Does that make sense? So that would work. I could say, well, let's just align some of the things to the start rather than saying let's align everything, and that's a better solution. But at the same time, I probably want the send and the reset buttons next to each other, right? And that's where I do need another container. I do need a div because if I don't have that div, then they will still stay on top of each other. So to get them side by side, I need another container. Okay. So by introducing that other container, they actually do become, you see they can become side by side, but they're also no longer in that flex container, so they're not suffering from the same stretch issue. Okay. Notice one thing. Remember we added some space underneath the inputs? Do you notice anything maybe awry there about the space underneath the inputs?
The message box or text area doesn't have any space underneath it.
The text, that area doesn't have one. It doesn't have space underneath it. Also notice I didn't change the label. Why is that? And how can I fix it?
It's on input.
It's on input. Okay.
So you can just add comma text space.
Text area.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Yep. So if I do that now, there is space beneath it as well. Okay.
They are also kind of close to the edge of the site too.
They are kind of close to the edge. So I might want to create some spacing there. I could go back and change the margin on the body, would be one way to do that. Or I could set some margin on the form. So let's say I set some margin on the form here. Margin maybe 0.5 rem. that would push it in. Right, that's going to be a much better experience for your users, especially if you're talking mobile. Recognize that a lot of people have cases on their phones, so they can't actually get to the edge of their screens. So you always want to push it in a little bit from the edge on mobile.
Okay, I don't know, like, when you did this,
Uh-huh.
or if I just blinked.
Uh-huh.
When you get the buttons next to each other, is that when you add the align cells?
It's when I put a div around them.
God, I literally blinked.
Uh-huh.
And they were underneath each other, and then they were next to each other, and I said, wait, what?
Yeah, it was the div.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it was the div. I couldn't have done that without adding the div because they need another. They're all in a column, so you can't have a row in the middle of a column without adding another layer.
The buttons on their own, they are a block item.
No, by default they're an inline element.
Yeah, that's what I meant. That's why they stack next to each other.
Yeah, so by default they're inline, which is why they're pairing next to each other now. Other things I might want to do, maybe I want to make the labels. I might want to make those more visible. So I might say like label and make that increase the font weight on those. So we might make those bold or bolder. Maybe just bold. So that can help making those a bit big there. What font am I using here? What font's appearing? Default, which is
The Times New Roman?
Times New Roman.
It does look Times New Roman.
It is Times New Roman. So typically Times New Roman you don't want to use. What's a better choice for your default font?
Arial, Helvetica, Sans Serif.
Yep. So in fact, if you do say font family, I remember there's IntelliSense for it then, not for just font. There we go.
I'd like you to tell all the English teachers I've ever had in my life to not use Times New Roman.
So here's the kind of the weird thing with Times New Roman. So Times New Roman is okay on paper. Times New Roman is actually pretty easy to read on paper. It's not easy to read on a computer screen. So typically we tell people, you want to use a sans serif font anytime you're doing something digitally. If it's going to be seen on a screen or projector, sans serif is better. If you're going to do it as print, then I would recommend using a serif font. Does that make sense? So your English professor, the reason they want you to do it in serif or Times New Roman is because they're going to look at it on paper and mark it up and grade it on paper. That's why. Versus if you're building a website, right? What's the most likely way that you're going to consume that website? Online, right? And I don't know why that is. I don't know what causes that to make the serifs better for print and not so good for screen, but it just kind of seems to be the case for most people. So Arial's kind of weird on paper, but it's great on screens.
The HTML, that was in the example yesterday. We did some stuff with that. Can you explain when you would do that?
Which part with the HTML? I don't remember.
Just in general, it jogged my memory because we were working with the styling for the body, and I remember there was one in the CSS.
Yeah, the example was the HTML, body, and you set the font 100% Arial, Helvetica.
Oh, yeah, and that was just resetting things. So a lot of times, if I'm going to you want to set the font size to 100% as the starting point, and that's for compatibility with IE. as well as making sure that the user's setting for the font scaling is taken into effect. So that's available in a bunch of different places in different operating systems. So like Android's got a setting, Windows has got a setting. If you go to, well, let me open up the settings app and look for font settings or make text bigger. You can actually change this to say,
right. Yeah, I've seen that. How would you differentiate HTML from? There's not much that HTML, at least in my mind, it incorporates that body doesn't. And how would you differentiate that from the universal selector?
So HTML versus body, it really depends on what browser you're using, actually. Some things, some properties you need to set on the HTML in your CSS, and other things you need to set on the body, depending on the browser. So oftentimes things like that I'll set to both. So things like this, just to be sensitive to different browsers, I might do HTML comma about body.
Okay, and the universal selector, would that work for it too?
No, those are not the same. So if I'm saying this, right, I'm targeting just the HTML and the body tags, right? I'm targeting just those two tags.
Correct.
If
okay, I just assume HTML is kind of everything because you got that HTML tag that surrounds.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's not.
Body, and all that.
But it's not everything. So for instance, this is not targeting my inputs, right? If I set this background, let's say I set the background here to red. Okay, now the page is red, right? You see that?
Yes.
So I'm targeting the page. But if I target the star, it doesn't have the same effect. It targets everything. Look at what happened with the fields, right? So the star applies to everything. The HTML and the body just target the page, the root of the page.
Do we need to put HTML and body?
At least from Chrome standpoint, it doesn't seem to be the case. I would have to go back and try it on different browsers to see if I needed to do that on some other browsers. And that's why I oftentimes put HTML comma body, because it's like, well, is it going to work the same in IE? I don't know. But if I put HTML comma body, then I know it should work for both. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So sometimes that's why I'll do it, just to make sure that it works the same on both. Because they have different interpretation of what HTML means or what body means and what the root is. Now, so you can see that the fact that if I put it on star, right, that changed the background of everything, right? Versus if I put the background on body, that just changes the background of the page, right? Right? But what happened with the font? I changed the font of the body, I changed it to Arial, but my label changed. That would conflict with the example that we just did.
Well, the backgrounds of your labels did turn red. It was only the interior of the input that didn't turn red.
Okay. Let me do another example then. So let's do background. White. We'll change our white, all our labels to have a background of white, and we'll change we'll change our body to have a background of red. Okay, my labels are white. The problem was the labels didn't actually become red. If I change the background of the page, it doesn't make the labels red, but labels by default have a transparent background. So what you're seeing behind the label isn't a background, it's whatever's behind it. Does that make sense?
So I'm not.
Yeah, it's kind of like you're changing the color of the drawing board by
Yeah.
targeting the body.
Yeah, by targeting the body, it's the
universal selector. That's
Yeah.
just changing the color of the paper on your easel, if you will.
Mm-hmm. What were you saying? Somebody else was trying to speak up.
I was about to say, so you're not changing the background directly, you're just changing the background of the background?
I'm changing the background of what's behind it, right?
Okay.
Of what's behind it, because everything is kind of stacked on top of the body. You can kind of see interesting behavior there. So what happens with the font is actually a different case, and this is where sometimes people get confused, because font is actually special. By default, font properties are inherited. By default, your font properties are inherited. So the font family of the label, right, is currently set to inherit. Like so, right? So this is what the font family defaults to, which is why it's getting the Arial font. Is because it's inheriting the value from the body up above. Versus things like the background is not inherited. So if I were to say, for instance, change the form, right? Let's say change this font family to maybe Courier. Where did it go? Courier. Right? So you can see if I change the font family of the form, that changes all these things that are inside of the form. Does that make sense?
It's interesting. It didn't change the buttons.
Yeah, that's interesting too.
Oh, is that because the buttons are in a div now?
I don't think so. So let's dig into the inspect, because that's kind of an interesting thing. So the button, okay, so here it's being set to Arial, right? So I can see there's some styling that's all being, you see this as user agent style sheet. That means it's from the browser, from Chrome. So Chrome is actually what's changing the font to Arial on there. Okay, so Chrome's actually not setting that to inherit on the buttons. It's actually setting it to be Arial by default. So normally it would be inherited, but the default styling in Chrome overrides it, as you can see. It's going to change all the buttons to be that. So if I had changed the buttons here to font family inherit, now they have the font from the form. You see that? Now that they're inheriting.
It's a Chrome thing.
So it's a Chrome thing. It's a Chrome. Chrome is setting the buttons to have an Arial font instead of inherited font.
I can see the headaches with working with different browsers. Wow, that's that's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Smith, I'm noticing that in your name box, it's got some kind of little icon over there on the right.
Yep. You may not have that. That's LastPass.
Yeah,
That's LastPass. That's a plugin I have on Chrome. So it's a password manager.
Oh.
Yeah.
Did you change the number of columns, rows and columns for the text area? Because mine is longer than the default.
Mine is 7 by 40.
Yeah, I did the same. I don't know what happened there.
Okay.
The main email and subject lines are about 2/3 the distance of that. I'm trying to figure out why.
At one point we had set the align items to start. Remember I set it back to stretch? That's probably what you're missing. Is that you want to go back to stretch. One thing I definitely want to do, though, and we haven't really done yet, is I want to make sure that I actually do want this form to be centered horizontally. How can I do that? How can I center this form horizontally?
Justify content center.
Okay.
On the form.
I could do it with Flexbox. I'm going to go back a little bit in time and do a different technique. You remember that there's another way to center things?
Could you just make it like a certain percentage from the left or right side?
Percentage from the left or right? How would I do that?
I didn't think that far ahead. I just was...
Okay. So, like, maybe I could set a margin. So if I said the margin on the left is 5% or 10% maybe. Okay, that's going to move it over a little bit to the right. But it's not going to center it. So you're on the right track.
Margin left and right?
Okay. Okay. Let's do an inspect on this. So inspect. Pull that back over here.
There.
So if I look at the form, pull this out here. I don't think that's... Well, that's kind of odd. So it's showing 160 down here as constant, which is what I would expect. But it's showing it as being full width, which I think that's definitely a case of it's not showing you the correct margin. Because the margin on the right, 10%, actually wouldn't be extending all the way over to the edge of the browser. So what I want to do, rather than just picking a percentage, I want to pick a value that's going to change dynamically, right? Do you remember there's a special keyword that I can use for this?
Oh, the viewpoint. With viewpoint? Is that the one you're talking about?
Not the one I'm thinking of. Nope. You remember you can set the margin to a special value to center things?
Ends?
Huh?
Rens or ends?
Well, that would still be a fixed number. It wouldn't change based on the size of the viewport.
Is it just auto?
It's auto. Yep. So if I set both of these to auto margin on the left and right, we'll have it center. And I can shorthand this a little bit because I've already set the margin property right. Remember, there's a shorthand for margin where I can specify the vertical and the horizontal. So here I'm specifying 0.5 rem vertically and then 1 rem auto. I might actually go bump this up to 1 rem. So it's 1 rem on the top and bottom, but it's auto on the left and right.
Is there a specific reason why you didn't use justify content here?
Because this case is simpler. When you're talking about centering things back up at the root, auto is a lot easier to center things horizontally than adding a full another flexbox and dealing with that. So this just takes a lot less steps.
Can you do the same with the buttons now?
Same with the buttons, as in center them?
Yeah.
I could, but I actually need to do something different with them. So if I say margin one, well, let me just copy that, margin 1 rem auto. You can see that it didn't work, but it also just kind of did something weird. I think I need to do 0 here. There. Okay. What were you saying, Sheridan?
Wouldn't you like center it through the div?
I need to center it through the div? What do you mean by that?
Don't mind me. I'm just having brain.
No. You're saying the right thing. You're saying the right thing.
Oh, I thought you were totally saying I was wrong.
No. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It is the div. I need to do something with the div.
I think she was going along the lines of like using the div to center it.
Okay. Yep. And that is the right answer. That is the right answer.
Use what you did with the form, or
okay. What could I do with the form? How do I target? The question is, first of all, how do I even style that div?
Oh, could you do like form, then space, then div?
What if I have other divs I want to add to this
you
form?
Just give the div a class?
I don't want to give the div a class, because what's the likelihood that I'm going to add another div?
100%.
Yeah, pretty close to it. So I would say maybe we call this, what do we call this? Buttons? Or button container?
I got so excited to say the word buttons, and then you said it, and I like literally just lost hope in the world.
Sorry. So button container. Okay. Yes, I need to target the button container. I'm going to give it a background so we can see where it is. What do I need to do with the button container to get the button centered?
Could you move, can you use the margin trick that you used before? Like just setting the left and right to auto?
Well, that would redo the div, wouldn't it? Not the buttons inside of it? Never mind, I'm stupid.
No, it's fine. You're not stupid. It does work. It does work. The question is, why does it work? Which this is kind of a weird case, actually. Because I'm applying these margin autos for when I did it here with the form is a block, or on the outside it appears as a block, and then it's also inside the body, which is a block. So traditionally that margin auto trick only works when you have a block inside of a block. So this actually works on Chrome, and if I remember right, this has spotty support is not supported on all browsers actually. Doing margin auto inside of a Flexbox. So this does work, at least on Chrome, but I believe that it doesn't work on other browsers.
So besides this one, would justify content be a better? Or no?
Well, remember, justify content is on which axis?
Right.
It's on the main axis, right? It's on the main axis, but this is not the main axis. This is the cross axis, right? So, huh?
Is this be a line?
This is the align. It's right. It's align items or align self, right? Align items or align self. So here I can do, this is actually a better place to do align self. And I might say align self center. Problem solved. And then I know that that'll work on any browser that supports Flexbox, which is a base requirement for other things anyway. So because this one I already have a Flexbox going, I'm going to use that alignment.
Can you get rid of the red?
I can get rid of the red.
Thanks.
Yeah. That was just for testing.
You always pick red, but my brain is always just like, go for gray.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I usually go for magenta, so I don't know why I'm going for red today.
I will vibe with magenta. Let's go with magenta.
So.
Align self, that's just for a single item typically.
Yes, which is all we're targeting. We're targeting that single item.
Yeah.
Right.
Align, just think cross-access with align.
Yeah. So align items would be all of them, but if I did that, then that changes everything. So I wanted to just target the single, just the buttons.
Right, because your align items, it's not really the form, it's the stuff in the form, whereas align self is the actual thing that we're working on.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Coming back.
When I understood all of this.
Huh?
I remember back in the day when I understood all of this.
Yeah. It's okay. It'll take some. It'll come back to you. So what about the what about this placeholder? I might want to put a placeholder here. We mentioned this previously. So right now it's not giving me a sort of kind of suggestion. But I might want to say, by the way, what kind of name do we want them to enter? Maybe I want them to enter the full name, so to be more specific. So here I might say John Doe as that placeholder. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Is this a case where you would use the given name property?
Well, what am I asking the user to enter?
Their full name.
Their full name, right? So given name is what? It's just their first name, right? So if I want them to enter the full name, what do I set the autocomplete to?
Name.
Name. Yep. Name is the full name. Given name is just the first name. Okay.
Do the text fields have to be that long? I don't think anyone's name is going to be that long at all.
It doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. I try to stick with that because it makes it easier to work with mobile at that point, because at mobile it makes more sense to be full width to take advantage of all the space you have.
Yep.
So it might be too long for desktop purposes.
Oh, we don't have to worry about that at all.
Yeah. So, I mean, if I wanted to go down to mobile, I mean, if I wanted to be maybe better for desktop, I might limit it at like 400 pixels. But I think 600 pixels here is probably a good interim. So what do we want to set the placeholder and the autocomplete to for the email address?
Okay.
Go ahead, Darnell. Go ahead.
No, Corey, go. Trust me, I do not have our answer.
No, I was going to say placeholder is like johndoe@gmail.com or something like that.
Okay. So placeholder, does the John Doe have a space or a dot, or what's between
No, I
those
just
two?
left it John Doe.
Okay.
No spaces.
So johndoe@gmail.com. Okay. What about autocomplete? What do I set the autocomplete to?
Email.
Sounds good. Next, placeholder for the subject.
I mean, I don't see a reason to use a placeholder for subject.
Okay.
If it's up to the user,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to give them wrong ideas or something like that, you know.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that wouldn't really seem like a required field at all.
Yeah.
Things like
That'd be like the subject in the email that they're sending. So yeah, so sometimes we'll give a lot of forms with contact forms will actually give a value there rather than a placeholder. In fact, because a lot of times we might say like, well, by default the form should say contact us or something, right? Sometimes it's actually worth going ahead and filling that value in, but we can leave it blank. It really depends on your context. So there is some value to not hinting the value there. Okay. Should I set an autocomplete on the subject?
No,
because it's the user's choice.
Okay.
And more than likely, you're not going to resend another subject with the same exact subject and message.
Exactly. So I'm probably not going to resend the same subject and message, which means that actually I should set it to something, right? Because I'm probably not going to reuse that value, right? So it actually makes sense to turn autocomplete off. Does that make sense? Do you understand why?
Yeah, because we don't know if the user is actually going to use the subject at all, and there's nothing. We don't know if they're gonna. Yeah, that's my answer. We don't know if they're actually going to use the subject at all.
Well, the point is, yep.
Would the browser try to fill it out?
The browser could try to fill it out. In fact, if you don't set this, it will save your subject from previous entries, and use the same subject if you fill it out the second time. So let me say I leave this off, and let's fill in here. And I'm gonna do. You'll notice already I've done something before, so it's giving me suggestions.
Wow.
Would the autocomplete, the off part be in quotes? Wouldn't it be no quotes?
What do you mean?
Well, if you have it in quotes, it would suggest off as whatever that would be, right? It's
Okay.
like how if the word true is a keyword, isn't off a keyword? You wouldn't want it to be without quotes.
So, okay. So minor note on HTML. Remember how everything is case insensitive, right? So technically it will ignore that, right? This is also a case where it ignores things. There's no difference here with the quotes or without the quotes.
Now you tell me.
The only time you have to add the quotes is if there's a space. That's it. You technically only have to add the quotes if there's a space. So for instance, for John Doe, right? If I didn't have the quotes there, see, it thinks that placeholder is equal to John, and then there's another property, another attribute called Doe. You can kind of see that in the syntax highlighting, right? So technically the quotes are optional anytime you, as long as you don't have spaces in the value. But we just always include them for as kind of out of habit. So does that answer your question, Daniel? Or was it Paul? Am I getting people confused?
Yeah, I get it now.
Yeah, Paul. Okay. Yeah, so having the quotes there versus not having the quotes there makes no difference, because both of those things are the same in HTML. Okay, so I think that is it for the example that we want to do here. We can see the reset button working. If I fill in some values, you can see it reset. We'll clear all of them out. Are there any questions about this? because it's potentially sensitive information, and obviously we're kind of doing an action, right? When I say contact us, we're not reading data, we're sending an email, right? Something actually happens when I hit send. Right? But yeah, because both of those reasons, because we're actually doing something, we're taking an action in response to submission, but also because there's potentially sensitive information there, kind of thing.
Well, that was very helpful for me anyway. I know how to tackle this next lab for sure.